The man who became the face of evil in America is dead. Murderer and cult leader Charles Manson had been in prison for decades for the brutal murders of 7 people, including actress Sharon Tate. He was 83. Freelance reporter Steve Futterman has more from Los Angeles.
Well, Charles Manson is certainly going to go down in the annals of history as one of the most remembered and one of the most notorious criminals here in North America in the 20th century. His crimes that he masterminded in 1969, 2 nights in 1969, April 9th and 10th, where 7 people were really brutally killed. These were ritualistic killings. They were stabbed repeatedly. These crimes are going to be remembered probably for decades and centuries to come. Charles Manson sort of became the symbol of evil in the late 1960s, early 70s. He lured young women primarily into his cult, promising them a better life. He fed them sex and drugs and rock and roll. They fell for it. These were women who were really unattached. They had left their parents in many cases. They needed someone to latch onto, and Charles Manson, unfortunately for them, was quite willing to have them latch on to him. He ordered his followers to commit these murders. He never killed anyone himself on these 2 nights. It was his followers who did what he ordered them to do. On the first night, they went to the Sharon Tate home on their own. They killed 5 people. The second night, Manson drove with them, but again, he did not take part in the murders. He said to his followers that this was going to be the start of a race war, what he called helter-skelter, that these murders were going to start a race war, and that when it was over, Manson would be in charge somehow. It never happened that way, of course. In December, a few months after the murders took place, he and his followers were arrested. He eventually went on trial. It was a bizarre trial. He disrupted it repeatedly. His followers disrupted it repeatedly. He may have been able to lure his followers and convince them that he was a messiah. That did not go over with the jury very well. The jury found him guilty. They sentenced him to death. But the California Supreme Court several years later overturned the California death penalty, calling it unconstitutional, and Charles Manson spent the rest of his life in prison. He was in parole hearings a dozen times. There was never a chance he was going to be released, and he ended up dying in a hospital, but still a prisoner.
Freelance reporter Steve Futterman in Los Angeles.